Greetings, first-time viewers, to what will be my first attempt to do a video review. If the visuals aren't fantastic or I ramble a bit, please bear with me. I'm hopefully just getting started and learning as I go. So, today I want to talk about an early access game called Shroud of the Avatar. It's classed as the spiritual successor to both the single-player Ultima series of role-playing games and the grandfather of the MMO genre, Ultima Online. It's currently available on Steam and via their own store for a basic pledge level of $45. And you may be wondering, should I play the game as it presently is? And what do I get for my money if I do? I hope to answer some of these questions. Firstly though, a little background. I kickstarted the game, which means I donated before the game was put into full alpha development. It's now approximately 2 years and 8 months since the end of the Kickstarter, and the alpha is currently on release 24. I personally upgraded my account to the Ancestor level, which is $275, before becoming disillusioned with the game and selling off the account and the benefits that came with it. Thus, I will be coming into the game today, both reward poor, as you the new purchaser will, but also with rather more knowledge of the basic gameplay than most would have had. I will try and keep this review informative and explain where I'm using my prior knowledge, but be aware that I'm coming in with a pre-formed opinion. So, all that account wibble. What does it mean for you if you were to buy the game now? Basically, if you buy any time before Shroud launches, you are classed as a benefactor and get the pre-launch bonuses visible on the store page when not logged in. Let's go to the store and look at a pledge. We'll use the Ancestor pledge as an example. If you can see the rewards, that is what you'll get once you pledge to that level. In theory. Royal Founders is the term for people who backed at Kickstarter and still own that account, and they have more benefits on top, not listed there. But we won't have to worry about those as you aren't a Royal Founder if you don't have the game yet. You can also add individual purchases via the add-on store to your account. When I sold my account, I sold all the add-ons and the Royal Founder status for extra value, and I have only a basic benefactor account, which is what this review will be under, the exact same as you, the potential new purchaser. But there's a catch, and it's quite an awful one. And here it is, underneath the expiration events. In order to encourage further donations and high-level spending, Portalarium artificially reduced or removed certain pledge rewards. So if you weren't a benefactor before August the 31st, 2015, a date that's passed, you now cannot upgrade later to the same equivalent pledge. For instance, the real cloth map at Explorer level is gone if you weren't already an Explorer by August. If, like me, you were, but downgraded before that date, even if you kickstarted, you are also no longer eligible to upgrade back and reclaim the full rewards at higher pledges. This is something you need to bear in mind as I eventually wander around the world and explore the game. Time and again I'll be pointing to things you simply will not have access to. Now, whether the basic game remains fun for you, or if the current favouritism for huge and early spenders verges on the dread term pay to win, I will try to be fair enough to let you decide for yourself, but it will inform all of my later criticism. Fair warned be ye. And one last final piece of setting up. I'm fortunate in that tomorrow I'll be getting a brand spanking new computer, so I wanted to compare performance as it currently is on vastly different hardware. My stats, let me show you to them. Okay, currently, and for the first part of the video, I'm running on this system. Notice the outdated 4GB of slow RAM. Shroud has upgraded its minimum requirement to at least 6GB, which is a pretty hefty chunk of silicon, even for a AAA title today. It also means that Windows XP is right out for Shroud, as XP can only access 4GB of RAM. I did have XP before I upgraded to Windows 7, but I didn't notice any huge performance gain in doing so. The CPU is just over the minimum, a dual core running at 2.9 GHz, with the listed minimum being 2.7. But the graphics card suggested, the HD 3870, is rather more performance than I have in a HD 4670. Pause there for shameless chipset porn. At a rough guess then, I'm right about where the absolute minimum you can get away with for Shroud is. Now this older system, put together years ago with some careful thought, can still run Elder Scrolls Skyrim on high settings. Let's have a look at that game running now for an eventual comparison, shall we? Whilst it loads, let me point out that Skyrim had a programming team of hundreds, its own long-standing unique game engine, and a whopping great budget. The purpose of this little clip is just to show how a low-end system handles Skyrim on high, so you get a sense of how mine performs, and what that then says about Shroud's current playability. Notice, even on my wheezing system, the huge draw distance.
Someone do something.
You think you stand a chance? You think you stand a chance? I'll have your head. Pathetic. Another victory for the Dawn.
Whoops, killed by my own companion there. That'll teach me not to set stray dogs on fire. But so, finally to Shroud of the Avatar. It goes out of its way to warn you it's still in construction, as you can see. Notice too those faster settings. I was never able to run Shroud on anything better before. Now, I won't be running with sound during this video in order to explain as I go, but when I last played the effects were infamously bad, whilst the music varied between magnificent and pedestrian. We'll see if it's still as bad in a later part of this review. These are the graphic settings in this video. The resolution matches that of the previous Skyrim video. Highlight strength I believe refers to outline on NPCs and objects, which some found off-putting. I didn't notice any performance hit on the ticked options, but peripheral lighting and shadows crushed my poor graphics card. The differences in game modes are complex and not yet finalised. My understanding is it will be the same game world with the same assets and limitations, but differences in who you share it with, alone, friends or everyone. Notice the store will meet him many times more. Let's quickly pretend we've read the legal blah blah. Yup, all that looks legitimate, let's just get moving on. And on to character creation. You'll do this many more times if you buy the game now, as the servers are wiped and re-wiped towards full launch. You'll also only get one character at basic pledge level, so make sure to make them well. If you purchase more characters, they will share the family name of this first one. Personally, I hate that limitation on roleplay, but it doesn't look like it will be changed before launch. My character will be Nemo Herringwary, a light-hearted, light-fingered fishing rascal, first born in Ultra Online. Bearded and bold, he's been weathered by the winds of the sea, but still keeps a cheeky twinkle in his eyes as he plunders his way through life. Not that you would notice with the rather plastic-looking Uncanny Valley dolls you can make here. If, as I start to just randomly set the various attributes, you aren't noticing any real change in skin and shape, you're not wrong. I couldn't notice the effects either. I actually felt this was worse than I had previously played, resulting in very poor and repetitive looking characters. Of course, in an MMO, most people are defined by their armour, so few notice, but one of the big selling points of Shroud is that your character is supposed to be you, the player. They make the same moral choices as you, they even look like you if you wish them to. As I haven't fallen into a big vat of wax recently, I don't get that feeling myself. But on a more serious note, it's not something I'm exaggerating for comic effect. See if you can spot what the far too subtle changes do as I move all the sliders before giving up. Incidentally, the loading screens are an odd design choice to me. In the first few releases you saw the full artwork, but for some reason they've added these weird stone tearing effects which cover much of them up. You'll notice too that loading is slow. Oh, there we go. Don't try that at home, voiceover fans, especially not if you're getting over a cold. Okay, so here we are in the new starting zone, and it doesn't look too bad, does it? The colours are vibrant, and the trees in particular have much improved from earlier incarnations. Number 1, the lodge. The lodge. A lot of thought has gone into the alignment of your starting view, but the UI is still incredibly fiddly. Watch in particular the chat window bottom left, and remember, I know it can and must be expanded from prior play. This will be very confusing to a new player. I also struggle to remember the key commands to access various features. I'll hit B for backpack and get B for buck instead quite a few times during this video. It's actually I for inventory. There's a reason that I opened the inventory here, but I'll come back to that later. It's then C for character to open your paper doll, and items can either be dragged onto there or directly onto your character in the game world to equip them. For now though, we're expected to go and talk to the obvious non-player character, and once you double click on an NPC, the view focuses upon them and you get locked into the chat window. I want to talk about this in a little depth because this will be the core of the single player and the questing experience. Conversation is based upon typing words which trigger responses, or clicking words if they are highlighted. This is the same system as the prior Ultimas and Ultima Online. The general design is that the NPCs will have a selection of generic responses to things that all NPCs have been asked about by other players, and they will also always respond to name, job and health with personal details. However, you need to be extremely talented to write good quests with this system, due to not being able to reuse words, as well as make the conversations flow with believable responses to those words. Notice that this NPC has to use both ready and ready to begin as response triggers. Then, as the conversation progresses, we get what turn out to be character-defining questions for my own player character, but the response isn't highlighted, and my first guess is incorrect. Now, English is my first language, and the questions are ripped directly from the single-player Ultimas, which I've played to death, so I know how they work, but I still get the answer wrong. For people who don't speak English, this may prove a frustrating system because they may not know the exact word required to get the correct response. This is something I had some experience of, as I worked on Ultima Online as an event manager for a little while, and I would often get emails from players stating that a simple use of a synonym, like blade or weapon instead of sword, would throw players and make the quest incompletable. The safest way then was to reduce the quest down to its simplest parts and make the language as plain as possible. But that kills character, as you'll now see. In the original Ultimas there were 8 virtues, but here they're reduced to 3, and my character is defined by the 3 quick questions that I have to answer before I have time to understand what is happening. I try to answer them as I would in real life, but despite expressing courage in the last question, Nemo, in my mind, who waves a cutlass about, is told he's a lover, given a bow, and then sent on his way. Now, for a role-playing game, this taking away of the ability to design your own character and hitting such a wrong note so quickly is a horrendous flaw. There's also the problem that if you have too many of these automated quests, I found, all the characters start sounding the same because you have to design the quest for the same standards, the same understandability, to allow people to be able to play them. Shroud, of course, is going to be made up of hundreds of these characters, And the writing standard is not the most brilliant, it has to be said. So all of the characters end up sounding very flat and generic. And that to me is, I have to admit, a considerable disappointment so far. Don't get me wrong, little nods to the past glories of Ultima, like riding a moongate to another world, is a nostalgic delight to me. But a whole game of this is going to struggle to rise above being as bland as porridge. So whilst we sit and wait for the loading again, I have time to point out that such wholesale thieving from your own past leads to huge problems within the storytelling. The prior NPC in her very first line suggested she'd been waiting for your return, but neither in real life nor within the game's own backstory have you been here before. Waiting on the other side of the gate is what used to be the original starting zone, and it's quite the tonal shift, isn't it? As a dramatic introduction, it might have worked, except we've just been told as a character not a few seconds ago that we've been here before, and that we haven't been warned anything unusual is happening. So whilst Nemo, who's a lover, might have been expecting an orgy, for all we know, skeleton attacks are pretty common and the dramatic moment is ruined. I'm harping on about this a lot because, as you'll see as the video progresses, there will be no other single-player content apart from quests along these lines, and again, they are really quite poorly written. And the quest scripting is basic at best. Notice I managed to trigger the second part of the quest before I even pick up a bow, just by approaching the dummy. And if you didn't spot the bow you were supposed to get, neither did I, and I vaguely remembered where it was supposed to be. The scale of the game is such that realistic sized items are often extremely hard to see in the game world. Remember how I said I was looking in the inventory earlier? Well, I was looking for the player guidebook, which apparently only appears in the second part of the tutorial, but now at least you can find the controls. I'm also not sure who gave me all of this beginner stuff. Did I miss a comment? It should be pointed out, though, that if you were a founder, a Kickstarter backer, remember, you would be coming into the game with weapons and armour. As it is, this bounteous generosity is going to be all that I get. This could prove to be an issue later, as in early versions of the game, crafting was an ungodly grind, equipment was hard to come by and expensive to get, and fair fights extremely hard to judge. I don't really fancy my ability to survive with a couple of potions. This next part is hilarious and completely unintentional. I didn't intend to prove that line of sight is largely irrelevant. I was just wondering what powers I'd been forced into taking, and accidentally started attacking the target behind me. Not content with this sterling display of trickshot archery, I wonder what spells I've also been forced to take. And then, oh no! I attempt to use the gust spell to push back my enemies, but it's pulled in front of me instead. My attacks go completely mad, and the best bit is, I quickly run out of arrows that I can't replace in the tutorial. Well done, Portalarium. Pew, 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 pew. Combat at this point is the MMO staple of power slots and timers, although there is still the card system, which I will look at more closely later on. What has changed since I last played, though, is that the levelling up is now based on using the skill itself, rather than the generic mob grinding as previously. If you've played Ultima Online again, you'll recognise the same basic system here, with the extra step of trainers, which I'll show you later. At one point I notice I've gained some progress in archery during this wailing on a defenceless target. But before that, no, the video hasn't broken. Instead, as I accidentally open the book yet again, the game freezes up and you get to watch it in glorious real time. So yes, back to trainers. One of the consequences of the game still being in alpha is that entire systems are being designed or redesigned without the wider game being ready for them yet. Originally, you would unlock skills upon a complete level up, and the trainer allowed you to spend points on them, so you wouldn't have seen a level up here previously. Likewise, this zone was designed before you were forced into a character template, and so isn't set up for you to be using a template which has limited resources. This is why I go back to Edward wondering if he could help with either of these issues, and as you saw, he can't. Instead, I decide to leave the courtyard. Active or lootable items in the game world aren't obviously highlighted, and if your eyes glaze over at the levels of conversation required to narrate every single quest, you may find yourself losing track of what you have to do in-game. For instance here, having Edward walk with you and open the gate himself when ready would have made much more sense. However, the level of scripting required to have characters interact with the world around them isn't in-game yet and possibly never will be. Credit where credit is due, combat animations seem to have improved since I last played, and whilst not perfect yet, watch for the moonwalking skeleton, are at least more convincing than previously. Please add your own pew pew effects for the rest of these fights. I'm not hearing any pew pews. Looting appears to have taken a step backwards since I last played, in that weapons dropped on the corpse straight onto your character attempt to equip them instead, so they bounce back onto the corpse again. You can see the error message turn up in the chat window. As Edward knew nothing of arrows and I'm running short, I decided to just run past the rest of this tutorial. The mystical blue Edward does know how to teleport though, it seems. How did he get out here? Does he think he's Dr. Manhattan? Fortunately, he's not as naked as Dr. Manhattan. In fact, the entire design ethos of the game, if you look closely, is very parental friendly so far. There's talk of cannibalism and chaos later, but apart from the traditional MMO underwear, nothing that hints of any real darkness. Already, I'm losing interest in the conversation and just skipping ahead. One thing though I forgot to show in this video is that you do have a journal under the J key, which is supposed to track the important points you've been told. I'll share this with you in the next video review. Instead, here I decide to experiment with some roleplay, and I break the conversation on my first try ye olde English. The early Ultimates had to have plotting as tight as a duck's bum due to the tiny memory size that they had to work in. Here, the NPC thinks you want to talk about artwork, and yet doesn't know the name of a major city in his own world. Again, the plotting in this game is not the best. This was a revolutionary level of conversation depth in the 1980s, but a lot of water's passed over the bridge since those days, and having watched Shroud develop over 2 years, even if you could program a response to every word in the language, I don't think it will ever be convincing today. You rascals who like to type rude words, though, will be glad to see he does know the word fart, but only if it's not preceded by another word he knows. From this point, we're entering the game world proper. The full single-player content is not included yet, so as not to spoil it for release, and I'm not sure I can add anything more to what you've seen so far, as it doesn't differ in style. Instead, Nemo is going to go to Ardoris. He's been promised love by 2 different people so far, and damn it, he deserves some love, so the City of Love it will be. We have to go via Sultan first, and what can I tell you whilst we load? Did you know that an anagram of Richard Garriott is tragic horrid art? I must be fair though and say that even on this system, it doesn't look too bad these days, does it? These loading times though. Still loading? What else can I tell you? Marge is a flower? You see, the reason... Oh, no, sorry. Sultan's here. No time to explain. I'm not going to explore Sultan, though. The reason being we're already 20 minutes into the game, and so far it's been 2 NPCs and a skeleton. And the one thing you need to know about Shroud is that it always has this glacial pacing. So I'm standing here for a moment thinking about if I even want to continue recording for tonight, because I know virtually nothing exciting is going to happen between here and Ardoris. But then I spot the notices top right, and I can always show you the combat details there if you wanted to see them. Which is how I also come to realise that all of the notices that I've been ignoring in the tutorial so far are stacked on top of each other up there. Again, the game is in alpha, but you'll see time and time again some frankly weird design choices that the devs seem to be happy with. In this case, a simple single page with 1 out of X messages at the bottom that you could have flipped through at your own pace would have been so much tidier. The second issue that I discover is that there doesn't seem to be any way to swap arrow type after I've run out of my previous ones, nor had them auto reload. I have a quick look, but don't bother too much about trying to find out how it works, because I have far too much faith nothing too dangerous is going to happen between here and Ardoris. Am I wrong? Wait and see. Before we go though, let's have a quick look at the trees again. Just before I stopped playing, there was a bug with trees whereby the background would show through them. And now, number 1, the lodge. The lodge. That's now been fixed, as you can see, so progress is being made on the game, but the light levels on those weeping willows still looks wrong though, so much more still needs to be done. I pull out the map next to find the fastest way out of Soltown, and there's one right next door to me, at the end of the river. Bear that in mind, we'll come back to it later again. The map is marked in the runic script. I quite like that, and I'm told later it will be optional, but again, it's not newbie friendly. It would have been a better idea if, as we've supposedly never been here before, but Outlanders supposedly have, and Edward knows this, it would have been better had Edward given us a map he knew we could read before we had to struggle with runic. And now, number 3, the loading screen. The load. What? Sorry, here we are, back on the overworld map. Wait, the overworld what? Okay, Shroud has 2 levels of existence, a single unified large-scale map that we're on now, and you enter zones to move to the full 3D area. The town we've left behind us is one such example, and we'll move through the overworld map to find Idoris, another. Everything you can interact with is inside one of these zones, the housing, the monsters, everything. You don't get a map of the overworld though, as I discover, and as you can see, you can't zoom out very far either. Such maps will exist in game, but you'll have to find them first. I skipped the gump on musical instruments. The game is slowly getting some depth to it, and I'm told it's very similar to the mechanism in Lord of the Rings Online, if you've played that. Now, I remember where Idoris is, and orientate myself towards it before walking off, but the camera angle is fixed so low it's extremely hard to be sure. Aha! Now this is an ambush. Eventually monsters and such will appear on the overworld, but for now they're just randomly and invisibly sprung upon you. But I thought I told you I expected to be completely safe travelling. Well, about that. You see, when I last played, the pathfinding of monsters was phenomenally bad, and I'm not exactly covered in wolves now either. I'll talk about this another time, so instead let's do some sky watching in the middle of this, air quotes, danger zone. The weird blobs in the sky are the planets around New Britannia, this world. There's an entire astronomy system planned, and the planets do have their own orbits and move with respect to the night sky. This promises to be a fantastic addition to the game, but in the last 5 or so releases since I last played, they've not progressed beyond these blobs yet. Progress is present, but it's tortoise-pleasingly slow. But there, wasn't that zone worth 2 loading screens? And this is something you may not have noticed yet, as the starter zones have been landscaped to avoid revealing it, but zones in Shroud are extremely small. The one we just left is probably the smallest, but even the largest only maybe 2 minutes of running to cross. It's something you probably have to be in-game yourself to fully appreciate, as it's hard in video to show where the land ends and the skybox begins. For now though, trust me on this that the small playable zones is one of the largest controversies around the game. In the meantime, I'm thrown by leaving the ambush facing a different direction to the one I went in, and need to reorientate myself again. I look directly towards where I know Idoris should be, but its indicator doesn't pop until very close to the city. There is a compass, which I didn't have up, and it's accessed by the M key. Our target, Idoris, feels, if not actually is, to be one of the biggest zones, and which also contains the largest concentration of player-ownable homes, which is going to be handy in illustrating the biggest controversy. Fortunately, we have yet another loading screen to give me time to chill out in. Now, Idoris used to make my system weep when I last played. Shroud runs on a peer-to-peer network, which means, in layman's terms, that the network updates at the speed of the worst potato-powered computer that's on it, divided by how much porn the owner is forcing it to download at the time. This is magnified by the fact that Shroud has mockingly been called House of the Avatar for its tendency to focus exclusively on store-purchase decorations rather than gameplay, and all of these items need to be rendered in-game. You'll see some of those items soon, when it's finished loading. It must finish loading sometime, right? Apparently not. Anyway, if you thought you could avoid the resulting slideshow of horror by living elsewhere, until recently the entirety of row housing, the smallest possible house in game, was also in Idoris. It was lag or bust, I'm afraid, and this in turn flowed from the design ethos that housing was supposed to be rare and valuable, that you weren't supposed to get a home easily. Everyone who bought a home from the store or from the pledge was promised space to place it at launch, but after that it was supposed to be like the gold rush of the Old West, people desperately scrabbling to stake a claim, and the entry-level homes were deliberately intended to feel like grotty slums. All of this was designed to encourage people to buy houses early. Oh, I see we've loaded. I'll expand upon this as we walk around and look at people's houses, but for those of you timing at home, that was a 1 minute 30-second load time there. And then we see the delightful single-figure frame rates for a little while. But well, I have to be honest and say that from here on in, the game does run so much better than when I last played. This is possibly because of the extra coding that's gone on in the background, but it could also be something else. It could be something that's missing. Have you spotted it? We've not seen a single other player so far, so we're possibly moving faster than expected because there's simply no one to network to. This isn't a coincidence of my recording times either. You can externally track users via Steam, and at the time of recording, the peak of people online yesterday was only 83, and the average playtime a minute 13 minutes, and I've probably pushed that average higher with my time in game alone. The development team does try and help the community in that every player spawns with a book which updates with future player-run events, but they've also described this as a niche game, and they're not kidding. What kind of niche? Well, here we get to the elephant in the room. Shroud so far is absolutely besotted with pushing for high-end real cash sales. You see, the way the game works has since changed with the introduction of player-owned towns, of which so many have been sold that housing spots now far outstrip any likely number of players coming into the game. The focus on fundraising above all else has broken the central tenet of the game design with regards to housing, and whilst I personally was happier with the concept of homes for all, if you're thinking, what could possibly be the issue with the game adapting to allow that? Well, you've yet to see the true objectivist hellscape that results, because you, the player, without real disposable income to spend in the store, are still going to be a grotty slum dweller, as the nature of the homes themselves has not changed. You can never, ever own a castle, nor can you own the keep-sized lot or any of the houses that will fit it. On the other hand, you can own a waterfront lot, but so far nothing that fits on that type of lot lies outside of the pledges, so you can't own a cabana, a lighthouse, or any type of ship. That last one broke Nemo's heart in particular. Nah, no fishing for me, matey. Perhaps he could fish from the air, in an airship? Well, airships are store-bought only too. Yet, even if the prices of houses you can place in game gold is low, the only way to own a player-owned town is by spending thousands of real dollars in the online store. Yep, you heard that correctly. They start at $900 and go up to $6,000. $6,000. And full control of your access to the lot the house has to sit on will be dependent upon your landlord, the owner of the player-owned town, not your ability to pay rent in-game with gold. So there is now space for you, but literally only as a tenant for the real-world rich. But it gets even more divisive. Notice that any town bought now won't be visible on the overmap either. They sold too many to place on the map without ruining the look of the game world. So even at $6,000 worth of spending, if you weren't in before the panicked cut-off date, you're buying an inferior product. Now, this is what the map is hypothesized to look like if only the 230 visible towns that have been sold are plotted at an average density. Another map has been released showing the plotted location of the first 113 placed towns, which doesn't look quite so ridiculous. But all the same, you now had the worst of both worlds. Housing space is plentiful, but housing type and decoration is a raging class war of real-world spending that is far, far out of the reach of you, the normal game player. And getting into the ridiculously worse still, part of the terms of the sale were that each player-owned town was to be personally customised by Portalarium in line with the wishes of the owner. It's a huge debate amongst what's left of the community as to whether the slow development is in part because of the amount of time that has to be turned over to supporting these towns. Portalarium did do the decent thing and open up their daily development talks for everyone to see, although previously even that stand-up corner itself was a high-level pledge reward too. Still, at least now you can openly follow it at this Google Docs page. and you can see there are hints of so many great ideas coming down the pike, at least on paper. But at this stage in the alpha, you just won't see any of them. Let's go into Ardoris and start totaling up the cost of actually having what is visibly there for you. Back to the video, and I took a quick detour into this little temple of the Oracle simply because I like the effect of the face when it rises out of the wire mesh. I believe the Oracle sets whether you're freely attackable within the game world, amongst other things, but which I forgot to do. In the next video, I'll turn it on in the hopes of illustrating how open world PvP might look, if that's your thing. I'm not expecting to get attacked very often though. I'm also not sure why I kipper about with the UI at this point, possibly because I've forgotten what else the Oracle does. I did get a copy of the Blade of the Avatar novel as part of my original Ancestor pledge, but I have been saving reading it for closer to launch so as not to spoil the plot. And the alpha has the same idea. Most of the game lore exists only in theory or outside of the game still. I walked past the crafting tables on the left because as currently designed, you need to have the patience of Job to ever craft an item. I've had a suggestion to time how long it takes in the second part of this review, so thanks for that you muddy funsters at the Insane Membrane forums. I've notified my next of kin not to worry if I disappear for a few weeks in preparation of this task. I do like how walking past areas of interest automatically marks them on the map and to your compass, which is why I notice something I just passed and go back to look at it. I also approve of how they're supporting the PvP playstyle by having combat arenas in the major cities. There's no sign yet, though, of any ability to auto-schedule duels, which might encourage people to take part or attend and watch. And now, it's time to get your wallets out, folks. Let's see. A player-owned vendor, not in-game to buy yet, but comes tax-free at the citizen level, so a $550 pledge. The piano is from that pledge too. The wireless device is from the pledge below the developer, but the birdbath is the next one up, the Edelman, which costs $575. There's a possibly unintended feature where you can keep whatever home is on a lot when you first claim it, but the 4-story house we see here, if you were to legitimately have it, is developer again. So, taking the highest pledge we can see, this owner has spent at least $575 so far, and unless they give you those items, you can never have them, as Portalium have either expired the pledge that it comes from, or removed the rewards to further increase the advantages of the in-game 1%. If you're already confused, well, it's hardly your fault. I was once a backer too, remember, and I still needed to cross-check all of these items using a spreadsheet too. You can't do it via the store page as it hides finds rewards if you aren't a founder, but it does show you items you can't have because they've since expired. Those crosses next to an item you can see on the spreadsheet, all since expired. Let's go next door and see how much this home would cost us. Those chairs and tables are, I think, craftable, but Trader Joe there is going to cost you at least $550 again for the citizen pledge. But our little rummage is stopped by a locked door. This has been added since I played. You had to prevent access to the whole lot originally, so that at least is a welcome change. Aha, though, we can get into the house in the middle. This is a unique 4-story stone house at developer level, $450, which they've not bothered to decorate. It doesn't surprise me because crafting is such an RSI-inducing grind. You'll also struggle to have space to decorate, even in this, the largest row house. When I tried to place all the necessary crafting tables a player might need, for instance, they filled every spare room in a 4-story, except for the stairs and the living room downstairs. But I checked the sign outside just to be sure it's not an NPC home. It's not. It's just a very good illustration of the current state of the game. Everyone is paying, but they're not playing. I decide at this point I'm going to spend the night on someone's ship, because that's as close as I'll ever get to living out Nemo's dreams. Ardoris is a city surrounded by the oceans, so I move to the edges. In the distance there, one of the keeps you'll never own, unless you spend $5,300. And the enraging favouritism doesn't stop there. Even if you've spent what is, for comparison, 1/3 of an entire yearly income on the US minimum wage right now, but you didn't like the keep style, well, they've expired all the previous homes you might have got from lower pledges, so it's the keep or nothing now. You do, however, get this lovely unique location and environmental setting, far away from the slums that cost those players at least $275 at the Ancestor level to access before the rest of you could grind out the gold in game for a home. Back into town, and we walk past some little watchers scuttling on the floor. There are some charming details in the game. For instance, the watchers, spidery type things, have the symbol of the oracle on their abdomen, which is an incredibly evocative visual even if you don't yet know the lore of the game. Do they serve the oracle, or has the oracle religion arisen from natural things interpreted in supernatural ways? Also decent is that the street names will eventually be chosen from player suggestions on the forums. The banners here don't seem to have them yet, but Owl's Head at least was named with ideas taken from the community. At this point, Nemo's bald head is getting pretty cold, so I remember I should have some rare hats for testing content previously, and I realised they might be in the nearby bank. I wonder though, do you even need to be told that even bank storage space is in the cash store now, but that they haven't decided yet how much increase you'll actually get for your $5 at launch? And these hats, which if you weren't in alpha for that specific release, you also, all together now, can never ever have. Well, those hats take up nearly half of the tiny amount of the 30 bank spaces a normal player actually gets. Demanding money with menace in this game that's obviously been designed for total bankers clearly doesn't work, so off we go. We meet our first trainer outside. Now, this has always been one of my greatest frustrations with the actual gameplay. You can, when you find the skill sheet, which I've forgotten the location of, oh dear, have a look at how you've improved your character, but you can't unlock those improvements until you find and spend gold at a trainer. Yet travel times are huge, NPCs are hard to find, and gold currently is still fairly hard to raise, so it's always been an annoyance to gain progress, and that's the opposite of good game design. This wasn't a problem so much though when you only gain skill points based upon infrequent level ups. Changing to a usage-based system though means you're constantly reminded of the smaller leaps in progress that will in turn keep reminding you that you have to come and find this bloke and hand over the Spondulix. What adds to the annoyance this time is that Nemo of course was forced to take these archery skills right back at the start, so he's expected to spend dosh on skills he didn't plan to take in the first place. And something which still gets me after nearly 2 years of playtime is that the skills window and the trainer window are identical, so you can never be sure why you can't raise the skill until either an error message pops top right in the skills window, or for the trainer it's bottom left in the chat window if you don't have any gold for it. Nemo of course doesn't have any gold at all yet, and I quickly run out of patience in working all of this out again, so I wander off looking for a ship to squat on. We pass through the NPC market. For every horrendous design choice, there does seem to still be a small nugget buried in all the poop. Here I'm reminded that our Doris Taylor will become Sir So-and-so if I stop and take the time to find out his name. Meanwhile, the combination of player houses, aqueducts, water wheels and ocean animation used to make this point the worst part of the entire game for lag for me. In this release at least, it's still running smoothly, but again, notice that there aren't any water-based homes anymore. Player-owned towns spreading out the tiny population means that even the largest city in the game remains empty. Then I decide to show you another horrible design choice. Ladders can't be climbed naturally, but a double click to teleport up and down. Honk honk. Still, at least the bug, which treated that teleporting distance as falling damage and killed you if you tried to use a ladder, seems to be gone now. No sign of any ships yet, but around the corner we do see some Christmas decoration, although it doesn't pop up until we're almost right on top of it. That reindeer cost $10 in the store, and over on our right we can see 2 more Duke pledge houses in waterfront lots, so 2 times $5,300 there. The glowing banner you can see, another $30. And around the next corner, at last, ships! And a little praise for the game again, as those small rowing boats we were actually taught in the tutorial act as transports to other locations, and the same is true here. But let's have a closer look at that houseboat. It doesn't look like it's decorated, but how much would it cost you? Well, a mere $1,600. Oh, and you'll also have to be a Royal Founder by the cut-off dates on that one too. Remember, I'll always be a Kickstarter on my forum account, but now, because I've sold off the benefits of it, I can never have this ship, even if I upgrade back the $1,600 to a Lord pledge. Now, I chose to abandon my opportunity willingly, but you, coming into the game today, can never have it. Here's another Lord level keep too, with a lovely view of the scruffy peasants in their row houses. $5,300 for that privilege again, remember. It's just a miracle you can't buy Droit de Seigneur in the cash store too. By now, it should be quite apparent how disgusted I am with how Portalarium has abandoned the original design goal of a buy-to-play game with optional cosmetic fundraising and instead walled off huge sections of the desirable content with endless Scrooge-esque cash grabbery. But what finally drove me from the game was the permanent degrading of players who fell below the insane spending sprees of the top 1% in order to further encourage those few players to feel like even more superior lords and ladies in game. If you could get to equivalent material possessions by gameplay, it might have been tolerable. But once more, you can't own these keeps and castles unless you're gifted them. And who's going to give away a castle that costs $11,000 to buy? Still, here at last is what Nemo longed to own, a galleon-style ship. Yah! Ain't it beautiful, mateys? She be curvaceous, like me one and only wench. But for $3,700, it damn well should be beautiful. Of course, Nemo would also have settled for the frigate, which is only $3,200. And there's talk of unlocking sailing in the first expansion to the game, if it survives to the first expansion, but the only real alternative you have for now is to buy the decorative ship in the store for $10, put it in your garden, sit in it, and imagine really, really hard you're actually sailing. Oh, and that's under the stretch goal system too, which adds even more infuriating issues. If the goal it's in isn't funded to the tune of $500,000 overall, the later functionality doesn't unlock at all. So, if sailing is added, there's no guarantee that the boat you've brought now will work in the expansion. I didn't have time in this video to go to an NPC vendor and check what decoration was available now, but when I left a few releases ago, there were no green plants at all for purchase with gold. They were all in the cash store too, and no guarantee that they would ever be in-game. Those steampunk radios we saw, no equivalent could be crafted at the time, so even the radio waves belong to the 1%. Quick pause here to show off this lovely environmental bug that has remained through every release. Although you clearly should be able to swim through the gaps in the piers, you've never been able to. And next door, some fun with perspective as the skeleton in the water appears to be rendered in all kinds of funky ways as I swim around it. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the only sign of another human player throughout the nearly 45 minutes of in-game footage I've taken. Well, I tell a lie, there was another skeleton seen briefly elsewhere. Did you spot it? I think I get carried away with excitement here. I can't leave it alone. Or maybe it's just that this is one of the few pieces of content I've seen in Honduras that won't cost me real cash money. I swim to the nearest rowboat in the hopes of escaping the water. I'll let Shroud off this one a bit, as it's clearly a nitpick, but if I'm in the water next to a boat, context should clearly show that I want to get out there, not be teleported to... where am I? Ah, I'm at the lighthouse now. Let's all groan at the punning location name, shall we? Honduras is supposed to be an oriental-themed city, and I expect this is the first time that you, the viewer, may have realised this. The only other clues so far have been the banners on the streets and the lanterns hung from building to building. Up the magical teleporting ladder we go again, and I claim this ship in the name of Nemo. There has been talk from the devs that houseboats will be able to sail like any other ship in the future, which once upon a time I'd have seen as something fantastic to look forward to. Now, I just expect none of the other ships will be decoratable in the same way in order to sell more of the ships like this in the store. It's the death of innocence that hurts the most about Shroud, really. I did ask around the community if anyone with multiple homes who didn't want a ship was going to sell one of these. Most wanted hundreds of dollars. One of them asked me to dedicate my game time to supporting their player-owned town, but no one really wanted to be too generous because, remember, they had to be $3,700 down in the first place to have one of these. The devs' idea of encouraging a rares trading economy just doesn't work, not when all of the rares are like the ones on these tables here and cost real money in the first place, because it means that the market price of them will always be fixed near the real currency cost. Again, who wants to take an obvious loss? Still, if I can't imagine better days, Nemo is going to strike a practical blow for the common man today. Ha ha ha! I'm gonna be sleeping on your fancy bed there, matey. Except most of the items in game still have no functionality. Sneaky attempts to use the O for remotes options and lie down onto it fail. Curses! I'll be foiled again! You can't even short sheet the upper crust when the sheets on the bed don't work, nor can you hide herring in the bedclothes and leave them unpleasantly stinky. My attempt to show my disapproval by gesticulating leads to a small bug there, where Shake Fist straight into Shake Head instead does the Dark Star salute, which is a pled reward too, but at least these can be taught to other people. I'm not able to replicate it, or maybe it's just that Nemo can't take any more of this financial greed, and he can't loot or pillage any of it, so shaking his fist is all he has left. And a fitting end to this tale, he has to sleep on the wooden floor next to the fancy bed of his social superiors like the scurvy dog the game thinks that he is. Well, that's it for today. Feedback is welcome, and for part 2 I've been taking suggestions over at the Shroud Unlimited forums for what to try and show about Shroud next. There's a huge swathe of content I've never even touched upon, and still a few dollars in your wallet left that haven't been shaken out of you yet. Hopefully by then the cold will have cleared too, and I won't be so gravelly. See you next time.